Valerio's mother didn't love him. Sometimes that happens when a child is unwanted, as was the case with Valencia. A young girl, just out of technical school, was assaulted by an unknown thug who dragged her behind some nearby garages. He waved a knife in front of her face, hit her a couple of times, hard enough to knock her out for a while. When she came to, it was already over, and the rapist was walking away quickly, his head down, not even looking back. "Thanks for not killing me," flashed through Valencia's mind. She had often seen TV shows about serial killers. She lost her virginity that day, along with her faith in men, love, and justice. She didn't report the incident to the police. It was not customary at that time, too embarrassing and awkward. The questions, the exams, the reports, no, Valencia couldn't bear that kind of shame, so she kept the crime to herself. After some time, she realized she was pregnant. But by then, it was too late to get rid of the baby. The deadlines had passed. She had to leave the office job at the factory where she worked after technical school and moved to a position in the workshop. The salary there was twice as much. She left the dormitory, rented a small room, and started waiting for maternity leave. Valerio was born on time, a strong and healthy baby. Valencia always thought that as soon as she held her son, she would instantly love him forever, but it didn't happen. She was a proper girl, well, raised by strict and moral parents. So, she didn't abandon her baby or leave him at the hospital. Instead, she decided to raise him as a proper mother should. Valencia had to work 3 jobs. She was rarely home, but Valerio had everything he needed. He was fed, clothed, and cared for, but not showered with maternal love. Valencia sent him to a 5-day nursery very early on and only brought him home on weekends. Then came school. Valerio was very independent, doing his homework, going to the store, and even making dinner, knowing his mother would come home exhausted. From a young age, Valerio disliked dogs, mainly because he was afraid of them. This fear stemmed from an incident when a drunken neighbor sicked his huge dog on Valerio. Valerio had to sit on a garage roof for an hour while the dog, named Diego, growled and bared his teeth below. Since then, Valerio avoided dogs. At that time, it wasn't common to keep dogs in apartments for pleasure. Dogs mostly guarded private homes, so they were big, strong animals that could deter any potential intruders just with their appearance. One evening, his mother told him he would have to live for a year in a small town with her sister, Aunt Valeria. Valencia had decided to work on a rotational basis for a year to save money for a cooperative apartment. "We can't keep living in other people's corners. It's time to get our own place," she justified. Valerio, mature beyond his years, understood and supported his mother in everything. If it had to be done, it had to be done. Besides, he loved his aunt, and she loved him too since she didn't have children of her own. She often scolded her younger sister for being too strict and cold with Valerio. She didn't know the reason for such behavior. She wasn't aware of what happened to Valencia 8 years ago. So, Valerio ended up in a small town. The town had a small pottery factory, and his aunt worked there as an artist, painting the pottery. Valerio's biggest problem was having to go to Mrs. Sarah's work for some reason, usually to bring her lunch or sandwiches. The gate was guarded by a huge dog named Jose. Jose would glare at Valerio, who would try to slide past him while pressing against the wall. One day, Valerio couldn't muster the courage to pass Jose for an entire hour because Jose lay on the path. Jose had just received a tasty bone from the guard, and any attempt to approach his prize was met with a vicious growl. Valerio froze in place until Jose finished gnawing on the bone, lazily got up, and left, finally clearing the way. His aunt asked him why he was so late, but Valerio was too ashamed to admit he was scared of the dog at the gate. Often, to pass the snarling dog, Valerio had to give him part of the sandwiches meant for Mrs. Sarah's lunch. While Jose ate the sandwiches, the boy, berating himself for his cowardice, slowly sidled around him and then quickly dashed to the workshop where his magical aunt worked. He could spend hours watching her without taking his eyes off her work. The best days for Valerio were when the dog was let off the chain to run around and stretch, and he wasn't at the factory. The dog immediately became a completely different creature. He stopped being a guard, and nothing mattered to him in those moments except his newfound freedom. He would run around the entire town, go down to the river, and frolic in the tall grass. During these times, people ceased to exist for him and posed no threat. But if, by any chance, Jose saw the boy confidently walking on the factory grounds, he would silently approach him and wait. He would wait for Valerio to take his bread out of his backpack and hand it over. The boy never had the courage to shout at, push, or otherwise confront the dog. Every time he met the attentive gaze of the dog's eyes, his heart sank, and his head instinctively shrank into his shoulders. That year passed. Deep autumn arrived, and the river started to freeze, though the ice was still weak, especially near the shores. On this particular day, Valerio's mother came to pick him up. The sisters hadn't seen each other for a long time, and Valencia decided to stay with her family for a couple of days. She had bought an apartment and wanted to take her son home. Valerio decided to surprise his mom and aunt by catching some fish for a soup. He put on his coat, grabbed his fishing rod, and went to the river. At the old water mill on a shaky bridge, the boy had long loved to fish. Valerio cautiously made his way to the edge and carefully sat down, casting his line and catching fish. The boy was happy, thinking that his aunt and mom would be proud of him for being such a grown-up man and provider. Finally, he caught enough fish to fill a frying pan and decided to head back. After gathering his simple gear, he stood up, turned around, and with one awkward movement, the boy fell backward into the water. His coat immediately soaked up the icy water, his rubber boots filled, and everything started to drag him down. He struggled, flailing his arms, shouting loudly for help. The most frustrating part was that the houses were so close, up on the steep bank, but the old water mill was hard to see from there, and the boy's faint cries didn't reach them. Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed along the bank and jumped into the ice hole beside him. Something grabbed his collar, preventing him from sinking, and his mom and Mrs. Sarah were already running down the bank. They pulled the unconscious boy onto the shore, and then, breathing heavily and shaking off water, Jose emerged. "Valerio, my son, please don't die," Valencia shook her son with all her might. "My dear boy, my happiness, my life, don't leave me, please, what will I do without you?" The boy opened his eyes, not afraid of anything. He hugged his rescuer around the neck, kissed his muzzle, and wet, cold nose, and through his tears said, "Thank you, thank you." Jose, the dog, licked his face and wagged his tail a couple of times. Valencia hugged both of them, her beloved son and the fierce dog. A taxi pulled up to the house. After saying goodbye to her sister, Valencia sat in the front seat, and Valerio and Jose comfortably settled in the back. The three of them set off to live in their new apartment, and the boy and the dog became the best of friends for the rest of their lives.